at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, John Kotek, Senior Vice President of Policy Development and Public Affairs at NEI, the Honorable Stephen Lecce, Minister of Energy and Electrification for Ontario, and our moderator Maggie Lake for discussion on financing green growth and scaling next-gen energy solutions.
Hi again, everyone. I am going to cheat my chair a little bit. Hopefully I'm not blocking anyone's camera so I can see everyone. So we're going to talk about the most interesting thing today, and that is the money and the financing. Because if we don't get that right, none of this happens. So it's really important to dig in. So thank you all for being here and talking about it. And what happens once we get the money and how to make sure it is effectively used, I think is fair to say. So, John, why don't you kick us off? And as we're looking at this transition, we heard a lot about legislation and really hopeful forward momentum, and we know that I know especially that there's a lot of investor interest in this generally. Where are we, though, when it comes to the financing versus the demand and the need?
Yeah, so from where I sit with the nuclear energy industry, first of all, to your question about demand, the demand uptick just over the last year has just been remarkable, right? So I'm sure folks have seen the Grid Strategies report, which really started shining a light on this issue late last year, where they talked about the need for 38 gigawatts of new generation by 2028 after decades of flat growth. Those numbers, I think, have only increased since that report was issued. We've seen, from our member companies, take a Duke or a Southern company. They were expecting to need hundreds of megawatts of new generation over the next 5 years. Now they're talking about several gigawatts each. And it's being driven by AI, data center demand on top of what we already expected to see in terms of electrification of transportation and buildings and the like. And so the demand is clearly there. I even heard a person from a not to be named state tell me that they've got enough demand requests to double the generation in their state. I mean, it's just staggering the amount of demand that's out there, and that's just here in the U.S. And the global demand is ticking up as well. And we can talk a little bit more about that and the export opportunities for us. But in nuclear, no, the finance hasn't lined up yet. Now we've seen some very hopeful things. Certainly, we saw about 24 plus countries sign on to a global tripling of nuclear pledge by 2050. More recently, we saw, I think it was 14 financial institutions announce that they're behind and ready to engage in the financing of new nuclear. In the U.S., the challenge is going to be how do we address what we call early of a kind challenges, right? We know the first few of any capital intensive new project are going to be more expensive. How do we get the policies at the federal and state level to line up to unlock that finance?
Well, lucky for us, we have a minister here with us who has done a lot of work. Canada has done a lot of work in Ontario, and in some ways can perhaps maybe be a sort of a lesson for someone who was early. Sure. And it predated, luckily for Canada, much of this huge now increase in demand. Can you explain a little bit about what's happening there and maybe some of the lessons we can learn from it, but just sort of bring us up to date on where we are?
Sure. Well, first off, it's an honor to be here. I represented the province of Ontario, which, if it was a standalone province or country, it would be the third largest trading partner with the U.S. after Mexico and China. So we have a very integrated relationship. We're democratic allies. We're leaning into that on the margins of the United Nations General Assembly, where there's an increasing realization, I think, for the world that we have to decouple dependence from those despotic regimes abroad who really undermine our democratic way of life. And the North America supply chain is so critical to both our prosperity on both sides of the border. But relevant to where we're going, I mean, we're in a nuclear and energy renaissance in Ontario. We've always had the first movers advantage. For generations, we've had large-scale nuclear energy. About 60% of our baseload energy comes from non-emitting nuclear sources. But we also have renewables and a large hydroelectric fleet. And we really have leaned into natural gas, a series of interventions that are going to be critical for the way forward. We're estimating roughly $400 billion Canadian. The translation, the currency it's a good deal for Americans, but it's a lot for us in Canada. But almost $500 billion of capital between transmission and generation based on our demand forecast. We are anticipating a minimum of 60% more energy between now and 2050. We may have to double the grid should we the aim to decarbonize. We have one of the cleanest grids on Earth. Roughly 90% of our electricity grid is non-emitting. We do see a cleaner, greener future, and that means we need to build more nuclear. And I think the critical intervention that's going to make sure that we continue to be in a forward position and sort of in an offensive posture to build on time and on budget, which is Ontario's track record to the world, is we need to have nimble regulatory systems that get to yes on projects. We cannot allow multi-billion-dollar capital, and that applies to nuclear and frankly to any project, to be stuck in never-ending red tape. And I think we all have examples where that has paralyzed the ability to complete the project, and it undermines ratepayer, taxpayer interests. And so Ontario has a very effective system in place where we've been able to do large-scale refurbishments, as well as the first in the G7, the first mover's advantage, because we're building the small modular reactor in Ontario that is on time and on budget. And so we want to emphasize that to the world, because that's not I don't think that's very normal to be on time and on budget in this space, but we've been doing it in large scale, gigawatt. We've been doing it with SMRs, and we're proud of that, and we're proud of the U.S.-Canada relationship too.
A lot of conversations about SMRs happening this week, and certainly the conversations I've been in. Eric, can you pick up on that? Because as soon as you said on time and on budget, and it was a governmental project, my ears perked up, and I was like, wait, that is a fantastic example to have, but that is a challenge, isn't it, Eric?
Sure, absolutely. But one of the things that we can do, so let me just say a little bit about who we are.
Yes.
At U.S. Trade and Development Agency, we're an agency of the U.S. government that's focused on supporting development of sustainable infrastructure in developing and middle-income countries. And we do that. We're also promoting U.S. industry and helping U.S. industry engage, get into those emerging markets, very much in line with some of the motivations that the minister highlighted. And on SMRs, for example, we're supporting a FEED study, a front-end engineering and design study in Romania that can help SMRs get into that market. We're doing that in Indonesia as well. So we're seeing a lot of interest in SMRs, but also all sorts of other kinds of clean energy technology. We pride ourselves on being an agile, fast-moving agency to help to get the project pipeline moving. So that's what we do.
So very interesting already in the conversation, and again, I think this is a theme throughout the entire week, is we are talking about financing, but we are also talking about national security. We are talking about trade as built into this. It is not one topic about financing energy. John, is that helpful? And what are some of the policies that you see or examples that we can all look at to help understand how to move this with the speed we need to meet the demand you just laid out, which when you're talking about doubling capacity and grid, that is mind-blowing.
Right. No, it really is. And when you look at the scale of build-out of new nuclear that we might see, right, it's going to take a really strong set of tools. In an earlier conversation, we heard Bill Nye talk about concerns he has about, if we went from today's 400-plus nuclear reactors to 100 times as many. I do want to address that because it ties into this conversation. I think that's really why we want countries like the U.S. and Canada and our allies at the lead of this global expansion, because we know we're going to see many times more nuclear power plants built around the world than we have today. It's the U.S. that led the formation of things like the International Atomic Energy Agency that has done such a great job of ensuring that the use of nuclear power around the world is done responsibly. And I think we're going to want to ensure that we are positioned to lead in the build out of that next generation of nuclear designs around the world, so that it's our norms and standards when it comes to non-proliferation, nuclear safety, and the like, that really become the global standards, right? And so to do that, in the U.S., we're going to need to address the challenge I mentioned earlier about the first of a kind, right? We know the first few are going to cost more. How do we give confidence to investors, plant owners, the financial community that there's going to be appropriate risk sharing to buy down those first of a kind costs so that we can get to a steady program of new build? Because we know from experience, when you get to that steady program of new build and a stable regulatory environment, you can start building on time, on budget. We saw our friends in Japan building large light water reactors in less than 5 years from first concrete to initial operation. It can be done. We can do it in North America and beyond if we just get to the point where we're actually doing it at scale and repeatedly. But we're going to need tools in the U.S. As I mentioned earlier, state and federal policies. We can talk about that in more detail later if you'd like. We're also going to need export finance tools, right? And so the work that TDA does, the Export-Import Bank, Development Finance Corporation, all of them, if we give them a stronger toolkit, that will magnify their reach. That will increase our ability to, again, be leading globally in the build out of this technology and to ensure that it's done safely, responsibly, and also benefits the countries of North America and others who were involved in that build out.
Yeah. Minister, you have to make sure it benefits the places where this is going as well. And I think we just talked about the aviation industry, that sort of end point being important, the conversation with consumers, the conversation with communities. For a long time, any of these intensive capital builds, whether you're talking about transmission or refitting plants, people may get on board understanding that there has to be new technologies and these energies to meet the demand, but then they don't want it in my backyard, right? That was a very, very prominent issue, still is, when we're talking about refining capacity, anything that's necessary for that, especially for the last mile. What lessons can we learn? What was the experience like in Ontario, and what can we take away from that key part of it?
I think first, as a first principle, we've been in the space of nuclear for over a generation. Like 65,000 families depend on this industry. And so we have built social license by engaging with community. And I mean that very meaningfully. I mean, we have community benefit components, and the Ontario Power Generation that leads much of these expansions has really built a legacy of engaging both Indigenous communities, local communities, and giving them a say. And as well as incentivizing them to get to yes on projects. There's community benefit clauses that are built into our system. We've also made sure that we're instilling a sense of pride within our energy space, particularly nuclear among others, within our education system, that K-12 system, to create pathways for young children, particularly girls, to enter into science with an emphasis on nuclear. So at an early age, we're educating young people about the promise of a non-emitting sources of energy and Canada's reputation in the world as a positive, collaborative, democratic ally in that respect. But we've also ensured community have a say. And we've announced, for example, I announced just a month ago, the largest competitive energy procurement in Canadian history, roughly 5,000 megawatts of energy. That represents roughly 5 million homes could be powered of that. And one of the new policy regimes we put in place was a requirement that local communities have to have a support resolution from their council, which some would argue, oh my goodness, you're making it more difficult to get to yes. But the opposite is true when a government, in this case in Toronto or in DC or in Albany, imposes their will on local communities without consent. It actually creates more consternation. It undermines public trust. So I think the democratic will of communities should be involved. And there's a way to do it, because we've built large-scale nuclear. We're now refurbishing our Darlington nuclear reactor, roughly 4,000 megawatts there. Pickering, a nuclear reactor, and extending that for another 2,000 megawatts. And we're going to be building net new, the largest of its kind on the continent, over 5,000 megawatts at Bruce C. So across the board, we're leaning in. And we're engaging community, we're giving them the incentives, and we're giving them a say. And I think that's really important as we seek to build net new nuclear and energy expansion. That'll be critical to our success.
Eric, this must mimic some of what you experience when you're going around the world, getting community buy-in, as well as making sure that you have the adequate, as John mentioned, toolbox to get the projects up and running, get a yes from the communities that they're in, and be able to move quickly.
Yeah, that's really important to have community engagement. One of the roles that we play is supporting environmental and social impact assessments for the infrastructure projects. So one of the key roles that we play is turning a project concept into a bankable, financeable infrastructure project. And just this week, there was an announcement that we're going to provide a grant just to the Africa Finance Corporation to support an environment and social impact assessment for what's called the Lobito Corridor. This is a rail corridor that runs from Angola to Zambia, and that's going to be, it's important not only for the local economy, but it's also important because there are a lot of critical minerals in that region of Africa that are vital for the energy transition. And building that corridor is going to enable those to come to market and support the electrification of vehicles and all sorts of other important roles in the energy transition.
So that might be underappreciated, that you can't just sort of, go and raise a VC fund immediately around some of these projects. You need studies, you need that financing, that part sounds like something that's underappreciated.
Oh, absolutely. That project preparation piece is really a critical link in developing infrastructure projects. We're constantly hearing how much need there is for clean energy infrastructure to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and all the goals that countries have committed to. And without that critical piece, project preparation, which is the role that USTDA plays, then those projects don't move forward. So we really need more investment in that piece.
Yeah, John, I think this highlights that there are many parts we have to get right if we're going to speed things up, right? Because traditionally, when you're talking about this, it's an infrastructure project. It takes time. There are many, many stakeholders. What do we need to think about? Because we have to accelerate it, not only for meeting the goals, but just meeting the demand. So how do we, what should we take away and think about when it comes to making sure that we're all doing what we need to do to help fast track this?
First of all, to the conversation about public support and community support for these facilities, I am pleased to say that the easiest place to build a nuclear power plant is where they already have one, because support in those communities tends to be something like 20 points higher than the average general public support, because they're familiar with both what the facility means, but also the benefits that it brings. Another place where it's really, where you see stronger support for nuclear power is actually in communities that operate coal plants, particularly in communities that are facing the shutdown of a coal plant. And those communities are coming to realize that much of the the workforce that works at that coal plant now can go to work at a nuclear plant. A lot of similarity between the job categories.
If I'm not mistaken, the IRA has some incentives built in, or that is the focus of the White House right now, to incentivize the transition where there were coal.
There's an energy community benefit. No, you're absolutely right, and that's one of the reasons why the folks in Kemmerer, Wyoming, are so excited to be welcoming the TerraPower nuclear power plant, which is being built adjacent to a coal plant that's shutting down. Another thing from a permitting standpoint that's really important for nuclear is that in nuclear, the licensing is handled by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And I'm pleased to say we've seen very strong bipartisan support in Congress for things like the ADVANCE Act, which have instituted some very essential reforms at the NRC, both in terms of the way they do business here, but it's also unlocking the ability for them to work more cooperatively internationally, because they are recognized as the best in the world in terms of their technical capabilities. We're seeing very hopeful signs from the Commission in terms of the pace at which they're processing applications now. Now, these are onesies, twosies. When we get to really, this wave of nuclear energy applications that we know is coming, that's going to be a different challenge for them. But I can say we're cautiously optimistic about the direction they're headed.
Fantastic. Minister, you wanted to pick up, and then we'll...
Yeah, I think just the importance of having regulatory regimes that are not paralyzing projects in never-ending red tape. I mean, there's prudence, there must be done due diligence, of course, for energy and infrastructure, but maybe as the sole representative of government, which means I'm particularly not a popular person in this crowd, but I'm like the one politician, but look, we need to do better when it comes to getting systems in place that does not hold up private capital. And we keep hearing this constantly, this refrain that well-intentioned governments are delaying projects, which means we're doubling or tripling the cost on the taxpayer.
That's important.
And I don't want my grandmother, a fixed-income pensioner, paying the price because of never-ending incompetence of governments, wherever they may manifest. Left, right is irrelevant. So our government in Ontario is really trying to focus on a system that within roughly 3 years, we can do large-scale impact assessments working with the federal government. We've worked with them to shave it down from 5 to 3. There's still work to do. But intergovernmentally, we are committed to fostering that. And I want to just pick up one comment about coal, because in North America, the single largest greenhouse gas reduction emission in the history of North America took place in Ontario when the government of Ontario decided to remove coal from our electricity grid. We don't burn any coal in Ontario. We displaced it in its entirety, largely using nuclear, but hydroelectric and renewables and some natural gas for sure. But that was the largest GHG reduction. And our interest in Ontario, sort of picking up on that export sort of vision that I know you do in developing nations, certainly not in continental North America, but the idea that Ontario and Canada, a nation that has shared values, an interconnected economy, 1 in 5 of our respective jobs are trade-related that benefit from that seamless movement of goods and people and intellectual property. The importance is that we have an ability to help export our clean energy advantage to the world. I mean, in Michigan, that abuts Ontario, 25% of their grid is still coal. There are states hitting upwards of 40, 50, 70%. So if we want to have a continental, serious decarbonization strategy that allows for economic growth, because those are not incompatible principles, as some in politics want to choose one. In Ontario, we choose both. We have reduced emissions. We're the only jurisdiction in our country to be on track to meet our Paris Accord 2005 targets, and our GDP is up at a historic high. So I really want to challenge those that seem to believe you got to pick a lane. Yeah. We choose to build our economy while reducing our emissions, and I would submit nuclear, certainly renewables, hydroelectric, are part of the critical path to deliver it. And I'm very proud of our relationship. I will express one note of regret and apology for the War of 1812. That was the one time we disagreed, and I want to apologize for our colleagues in the White House, because I believe we may have created some destruction there. But since then, we've been very close friends. We've fought in every war. We've gone along, and we believe in the same principles of freedom and human rights and the rule of law. So I just want to express gratitude to our American friends, a beacon of hope in the world. We still believe in the promise of our relationship, and I really do believe with all the darkness of the world and craziness happening out there, there's still a lot of good happening between our nations. And if we stay close, stay connected, at least our nations could deliver the energy security we deserve.
That's a fantastic way to leave it, and so great now that we have these tangible examples and lessons that can be shared and progress to report. We just need to speed it up. So thanks to all of you.
Thank you.